Good afternoon and welcome everybody. It's wonderful to be back. I've got a very special show today with Val McDermid, who I think actually I can fairly say needs no introduction, but also with Mel Young, who probably does need an introduction to crime readers anyway, and crime writers. When I do these things, I often ask the guest if they've got somebody that they'd like to be talking to on this. Partly because I want to get more people other than just writers talking to each other, and I want to find about the whole world of books. And Val said, well, actually, can you do something completely different and talk about the Homeless World Cup? And Mel is the co-founder and chair of the Homeless World Cup. So first of all, for people who don't know about it, could you actually just tell us what it is, Mel?
Yes, very nice to be here. The Homeless World Cup we started in 2003. And very simply, we work in over 70 countries in the world, and we get homeless people playing football. And it's just a wonderful game because it's very simple. All you need is a ball, and you kick it around. And then once a year, players are selected to represent their country. We play this street soccer, which is small-sided football. Cities bid to host it. And then teams of people, teams representing the country, both men and women, come to play in the event. We normally have 48 in the men's competition, 48 countries, and 16 in the women. So it's quite a big competition. But the critical thing for us, since we've done it every year since 2003, is about the impact. And so many of the players change their lives and move away from homelessness as a result of getting involved in the football. So in a nutshell, that's what it's about.
Which is brilliant. And we'll talk about it more later, because obviously, as with COVID-19, it's no longer simple. But Val, why were you interested in me getting Mel on?
Well, I've only recently become a part of the board of trustees of the Foundation for the Homeless World Cup. And I was very excited about this year's tournament, which was due to be in Tampere in Finland, and wanted to come along and see it. I went to some games when they had it in Glasgow a few years ago, and I thought it was inspirational, actually. The atmosphere was tremendous, and seeing the enthusiasm and actually the level of skill of the players was again really inspirational. I've been involved with football in Scotland. Some might say it's not quite football, it's Raith Rovers Football Club. So I think it was my involvement with that led Mel and his colleagues to invite me on to join in with the process of spreading the word, really, because it's not just about the tournament, it's about raising awareness. This is a win-win tournament. It's a great profile raiser for the people who are playing in it, but it's also a great opportunity to, I suppose, to remind people about the impact of homelessness, about the damage it does to people's lives, but that it is still possible to have a life after homelessness.
Yeah, I just want to say hello to a few people turning up, because we're having loads of people who come along, and a whole lot of new ones as well. But hello, Sven's from Germany. Hello, Hugo from Norway. Andy, who's a good regular. Keith. Anyway, loads of people. Hello, lovely to see you. But just going back to that, your particular interest in football started very young. I mean, it wasn't just Raith Rovers, were you? When you talk about spotting talent, that's what your family was doing. Your dad was doing that, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, my dad actually wanted to be a professional footballer, but he got TB in the bone in his leg during the war, and so that put paid to his potential career as a footballer. But he never lost his love for the game, and he became a scout for Raith Rovers in the 1950s, and he discovered a player called Jim Baxter, who is probably the greatest footballer Scotland has ever produced. And my dad spotted him when he was playing for Crossgate's Primrose. My dad always used to say a blind man could have spotted Jim Baxter, but he was the guy who was there on the day and signed him for Raith Rovers. Baxter was earning £3 a week working down the pit. And my dad said, we'll give you £6 a week to come and play for the Rovers. And he stayed with us for 18 months, and then he went to Rangers and had this phenomenal career, both for club level and for Scotland. Probably his most notorious or famous moment was in the 1967 England v Scotland game. At the time, England, of course, were champions of the world. And Scotland took them on at Wembley, and Baxter just ran rings round them. At one point, he actually started playing keepy-uppy and was instrumental in us winning 3-2, which gave us the proud claim that Scotland were the champions of the world. But I have to say, although we might not win the big World Cup, since the Homeless World Cup started in 2003, we've won it twice.
Absolutely.
Well, there you go.
Absolutely.
So tell us, Mel, I mean, what is it about? Is it football in particular, or is it just sport that makes such a difference to people who really don't have a lot to attach to at the time, presumably, when you're looking at homeless people? What's the transformative element here?
I could just say before I answer the question, yes, I remember watching that Jim Baxter game, Scotland against England. It was just superb. I mean, Scotland, the way they played, they won 3-2, but they were so dominant. If they played it another way, it would have been 6-0. But the way they decided to play it by doing keepy-uppy and so on, it was just fantastic. A kind of highlight of the football world, and Baxter was superb. To answer your question, football, I'm a great believer in all sport. You get involved in sport, and it's a great equalizer. It doesn't matter how good or bad you are, but you can play it, and you get to feel part of something. And when you're homeless, you're alone and isolated. So just that kind of feeling of being part of a team, I think, matters. And football is the best because it is such a simple game. I mean, anybody can play. You just need a ball. With some of our African partners, for example, they make balls out of plastic. They get old plastic bags, push them all together, put some string around it, and that becomes the ball. And they bounce, and they're quite good balls, and until they fall apart, and they make another one. So, you don't need anything. You just need your feet. You can play 10-a-side or 20-a-side or 2-a-side, and you can be rubbish or wonderful. We could have you in the team and Jim Baxter in the team if he was around, and we'd all have good fun, And so I think it's that the power of sport. There's the element of sport in it that brings people together in a kind of cohesive way and makes you feel part of something, and that's key. It's a psychological step. Homeless people are excluded from society and are not part, and it's a huge psychological step to get out of there, quite apart from the practical issues. And football really helps.
And you don't need any fancy kit; you just need your feet. Right. I've seen kids, playing barefoot, and it doesn't matter. It's a game that, as you say, it's simple, but you don't have to have great skill to be part of it. And it's one of those things that's easy to pick up, and you don't have to have money to play football.
So what would have been?
Absolutely, that's right.
What would have been happening? Do you actually? I mean, so all these nations are coming together. That you found all these people who are homeless and they're playing football, and you bring them all to a place to have this tournament. Is that right?
Yes. Cities bid to host it, and so we've been all over the world. We've been in Rio and Paris and Cape Town and so on. And the players are selected to represent their country, and they come and play for their country. They're incredibly proud to do so. They stand there singing the national anthems in the strips of their countries, which is a fantastic morale boost for them. And then we attract a lot of people who come and watch. I mean, I think the biggest attendance we had in a week-long tournament was 168,000 people came to watch when we were in Mexico City over the week. And if you think about it, that's 168,000 people coming to watch homeless people play football. And just that, the homeless person, it just changes them because they've been feeling so excluded, and really their self-esteem is very low, and now everybody's applauding them. And of course, then they do their best for the country, and they're always fantastic ambassadors. So from a Scottish point of view, I mean, Val was mentioning earlier, I mean, I've seen Scotland win the World Cup. I can say that without a word of a lie. I've seen it happen twice, and the players were just fantastic ambassadors for the country. The way they played and the way they responded was fabulous to see.
And I was looking at your website, and you've got some fairly impressive stats about how effective it is about helping people change at that sort of point in their lives.
Yeah, I mean, people ask me what it's about. There isn't a kind of ingredient in there which is we can't quite articulate. Something happens, and it's about that power of football. But the reason we do it, we have these great events, and I always say to people, come along, if you can, because you'll be inspired. But if it was just that, it's really about the change in the players. That's what drives us. And as you say, the statistics are very good. 80% of the players involved are change their lives forever, get out of homelessness. We've worked with 1.2 million people, or over 1.2 million people around the world since we started. So it's a considerable number, big impact. Of course, it's a global language, so people understand it. So we have teams playing against each other. They can't speak the same language to each other, but they certainly understand A, where they came from, and B, how to kick a ball.
Yeah.
And even though this year's tournament has had to be cancelled, we're still planning to have a celebration around the World Cup. On the day that would have been the final of this year's Homeless World Cup, we're planning a day of raising awareness. So there'll be various things targeted on that day, July the 5th, to draw attention to the World Cup and to help raise funds for next year's tournament and tournaments beyond that, because this is not something that's going to stop just because we've had to cancel it 1 year. But we want to not to forget about its importance. And of course, we need to raise funds to carry on the hard work that goes on behind the scenes. Everyone has got to be transported there. People have to have accommodation there. People have to have food when they're there. So there's all these things that have to be taken into account that we need to raise funds and we need to raise awareness for.
And if the millions of people watching want to do something about that, there's actually a URL zipping across the bottom of the screen right now, which takes you to the website, which presumably there's information there about how you can contribute, as well as presumably watch what you're doing on the day instead.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yeah, we're going to have a day, kind of a bit like a Red Nose Day, and we're going to get some personalities to come along and do some things. We're going to have a virtual competition with the players who might have been coming to try and join them up, just to kind of give a bit of a morale boost for everybody. And so, it'll be a fun day. It won't obviously be the same as actually having the event, but all the same, we're all in the same boat these days. Everything's been cancelled everywhere. So this is what we hope to do, and hope to raise a bit of money and a bit of awareness.
I think this is particularly pointed this year because the impact of COVID-19, I think, is going to provoke an increase in homelessness around the world. People are losing their jobs, people are losing their homes practically much on a daily basis. And so this means that the work that we're trying to do here becomes even more important, becomes even more pointful.
It must be an unbelievable time for homelessness. I mean, everybody's had these grand statements about how it's levelling out and things like that. But it's not at all, is it? I mean, it's hitting poor people incredibly hard, all this.
Yeah. We're not all in this together. There's an awful lot of people towards the bottom of the social heap whose lives are being completely destroyed by this. Part of the drive towards making sure that we celebrate the day that would have been the World Cup final for Homelessness World Cup this year is about that raising of awareness, and it's about that saying, those of us who are fortunate enough to be not homeless, as it were, we should look to help people, hold out a hand. We did a series of events last year's Edinburgh Book Festival. I curated a series of events about homelessness and refugees, and I was astonished by the response of people to that. It was as if by presenting this in such a way, people stopped and thought about what was going on around them. It wasn't something that was happening over there. It was something that was happening in their street, in their town. And I think that that's something that we really need to raise awareness of.
And I've because this is the book thing, I put up a book that Mel wrote about it's not just us who write books. You wrote one. And presumably this has as well, it's about the story, but presumably it's got some of the anecdotes about the people who have been changed by this. I mean, does it bring out personal stories in that way?
Yes, the book actually talks about the journey of the Homeless World Cup as we moved around the world. But it's all about people at the end of the day, and that we have so many stories. I mean, inspirational stories from homeless people around the world who've been in really, really bad situations and managed to get themselves out of that situation through the Homeless World Cup. So we celebrate that. But then there's a whole infrastructure of people around us. So lots of volunteers, some who come to the event every year, and we couldn't do without them. Sponsors, people who are behind it. And to me, it's an example of if we all come together and do a little, actually you can do a lot as a result when you come together. And I hope that this current pandemic does bring people together around the community after this is finished, after we come out, because I think Val's absolutely right. That the level of poverty, or people who fall into poverty through losing their jobs, and homelessness is going to grow substantially everywhere. And we have to be looking at ways in which we can help people not arrive in that situation, or if they do, how we support them. That imperative is going to be there. Always when these things happen, it's the poorest or the poorest of the poor that get hit, always. People who have wealth and so manage to survive. It's not necessarily they're not impacted, but they manage to survive. So, it becomes even more important, as Val says, the work we're doing, and we'll certainly continue to do it.
There's a comment from Deirdre Campbell, says, Homeless World Cup is amazing, honoured to be a volunteer when it was at Glasgow. So it's,
well, that's the point I'm making again. I mean, it's like, we couldn't do it without all of these volunteers in the cities we go around to. And, whatever Deirdre did there, that little amount actually is a lot, contributes a lot, and it makes a difference. And that's what happens when we all got together as a community, as people, and want to do something. That's how you create change.
And it changes the lives of the volunteers as well, not just the participants. People make friendships, people make connections, people make relationships, and that helps it broadens their understanding of the world. And at the end of it, people come away understanding that this is something that can make them feel better about themselves and feel better about the world.
Absolutely. I think we find that with people, lots of people who come along as volunteers will talk about that. And that's how we get these international volunteers that come every year. I mean, we have one person that comes from Australia. She takes her holidays and volunteers and comes every year wherever we are in the world. Because she says, I just love it, and I'm doing something, and it's changed the way she is. But I always say to people who come and watch, and we get these crowds, that they also change, because there's a stereotypical view which is negative towards homeless people. People won't go near them in the street, etc. And then, if you like, the next day they're sitting in the stands cheering the same person because we've simply changed what they're wearing. And actually, then they'll never look at homeless people in the same negative way again as a result. So you're getting, change in the homeless person, which is our primary objective, change in volunteers, change in people who are watching. The media also, another whole area, because the media has been so positive everywhere we've gone, whereas in the past, I think the media can be pretty negative. So, it's all about change and building on that change and doing little things.
Rosie Vetch asks, do the big clubs offer support?
Some do and some don't. So a lot of the football clubs actually quietly do a lot of good things. Actually, they don't really talk about it, but they do a lot of good stuff. So some of the football clubs have done really nice thing, and some of the footballers have as well, just by turning up at training sessions with the homeless guys. And I remember the story of Ronaldo, not Cristiano Ronaldo, the Brazilian Ronaldo, when he played at Real Madrid. So Real Madrid organized a kind of PR thing where the team came down to where the Spanish homeless team were training to come to the Homeless World Cup. And it was wow factor you can imagine. And a lot of cameras and so on, and then they headed off, so it was very nice. But then the next week, Ronaldo turned up on his own. He wasn't supposed to, he wasn't allowed to do things like that. He just turned up and started playing with the guys until people in the streets started going, hey, there's Ronaldo, and he had to run away. So then the following week, he turns up again, and he kept coming back. And it's so impactful, that, and so good of him. And so you'll find footballers, some football clubs, not all, will get into this. And again, it's not about necessarily doing big things, it's about doing little things, and these little things matter.
So it can change lives even at the very top of the game.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's something great about watching people. I mean, professionalized sport becomes very professionalized sport. There's something great about looking at it at other levels, isn't it? There's different types of football that still can be very beautiful as a game, can't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, I wouldn't be forgiven if I didn't talk about crime fiction, because that's kind of what brought this thing on. So I've got to ask Val. Val, what are you working on right now?
Well, I'm trying to write this year's novel, which is a Karen Perry novel. Working title is Still Life. I don't know about you, but I'm finding it really quite hard to concentrate and to focus. So my normal working day, I suppose, is quite truncated. I'm not as productive as I normally am. How are you finding it, Billy?
I'm not finding it that hard, and I was wondering if, because you're a former journalist, and I think somehow journalism is really great for writing because you're used to shutting out noise, and you've got to. But it's strange times, isn't it? I find it's almost that it invades so much of your life going on right now that it's quite hard to do. But actually, weirdly enough, it's that thing that we're at home. That's what we normally do. For other people, I don't know what you're like, Mal, but all people aren't used to spending this much time at home. We are, if you know what I mean. How do you find that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'm finding it okay being at home. Actually, partly I think because I've been so busy, because everything's changed, and so the different things I'm involved in. The phone goes all the time, emails are going all the time. So I've adjusted it to it not too bad. I really miss the human contact, though. I'm sure we all do, and because we derive so much from that. But actually, if you'd asked me before we're going to have this lockdown and you're going to be stuck in the house, I'd have gone, that's going to be totally horrendous. But I found it not too bad. Just as long as I'm able to get out for a bit of exercise once a day, which I'm being very religious about. Without that, I think I'd find it much more difficult, to be honest.
Now, I remember a couple of years ago listening to a play of yours, Val, called Resistance. Who knew? You spent a lot of time talking to the sort of scientists who are presumably dealing with this stuff just now. I mean, looking back on that play quite a lot. I mean, a brilliant play. It was Gina McKee in it as the main character. I really loved it. And you presumably you did. The science was saying, "Oh God, we should worry about this," and that was a bacterial plague, I think. But all the same, very, very similar lot of science behind some of that stuff.
Yeah, it came out of a project that the Wellcome Trust do every year. They bring together writers and radio producers and scientists, and every year they pick a particular theme. And the year I was invited to come along, the theme was antimicrobial resistance. And the chief medical officer, Sally Davis at the time, gave us an absolutely horrifying version of what the future could hold and what the future probably would hold. She talked about there will be a plague and it will be hugely destructive of our society. And so I talked to the scientists and I went away, and the only thing I could think of writing was an apocalypse. I'm sorry about that now. But faced with what she was talking about, it seemed to me to be the obvious road to go down. So I wrote about a bacterial infection that started off at a music festival, sort of a bit like Glastonbury, only I moved it to Northumberland. And of course, people spread out all over the world from this initial infective source, and the bacterium mutated and became really quite lethal. And it had that perfect storm, the mix of lethality and infectivity, and a period where you're infected but not got any symptoms. And so the death rate for my plague was far higher. And what we haven't experienced with COVID-19, thankfully, is a sort of complete collapse of civic society. But the really weird thing about this was that we decided that this would make a good graphic novel. And the artist who's been drawing the graphic novel delivered the script a couple of days before lockdown started. So as lockdown was starting, I was going through this graphic novel page by page, thinking, "Oh my God, can we even publish this now?"
I know. I think that's one of the weird things because, your books have a lot about the real world in them, and I think one of the things that I'm finding terrifying is that I don't know quite what the real world is now. When we emerge from our front doors, it's really hard to judge what the shape of it's going to be.
The book I'm writing at the moment is actually set. I mean, it was going to be set in February 2020 before all this started, but I'm really glad now that it's in February 2020 because the world was almost normal back in February. And it didn't have to accommodate the colossal changes that we're all going to see over the next couple of years.
Luca Resti, who I think you may know, asked a well-planted questions like, "Have you ever been to Glastonbury, Val?" Now, you must be missing that. headlining last year, obviously. But that's been a lovely thing for a crime writer to do, because you do yearn for ways of getting out of the house interesting. But Val's a member of the Fun-Loving Crime Writers, and Mark Billingham, who was on a couple of weeks ago, was also on that. And that must be great fun. Another way to use your head, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and Luca, of course, is our bass player. So we kind of started by accident. It was one of these things that comes from drink and over ambitiousness. But we formed the band. We first performed 3 years ago at the Edinburgh Book Festival, and I think people came along because they thought we were going to be a bit shit and they'd be able to laugh at us. And then we started, and they realised we're actually quite tight. I mean, it's mostly because Luca is the bass player, and Stuart Neville, who's the lead guitarist, and Doug Johnson, who's the drummer, have all been in bands ever since they were teenagers. And so they're a really solid back line, and that makes it much easier for the rest of us. And I used to sing in folk clubs and the like when I was younger. So for me, this has been an absolute joy to play with the guys. There's something really, it's good for your mental health, but it's good for your physical health as well, to stand up and just open your chest and sing. And the companionship and the camaraderie in the band has been great. And I say we started this, just as a bit of fun, and then last year we found ourselves playing Glastonbury, just completely mad. So there we were in the acoustic tent at Glastonbury with like a couple of thousand people standing there, like listening to us. Just
it's brilliant, isn't it? I mean, you do some extraordinary things in your position. It's great to be invited to all stuff. Rosie asked a great question, which is like, as you writers live in your heads, but now there are no external influences. I mean, is that a worry, actually, about not being able to eavesdrop in conversations and do all those things that actually presumably seep into your books?
Well, it's slightly problematic, I think, because a lot of the stuff that that ends up feeding into the books is stuff that you hear on the bus, or you hear in the street, or you see people behaving in a particular way. But I think I've got enough stored away in the back of my head to keep me going for quite a long time. I've been doing this for a long time. 30 odd years I've been publishing books, and over that time there's been a lot of stuff that's just been piled into the back of my head, and some of it's being plucked out of deep obscurity.
Now, Mel, are you a reader as well as a organizer and a writer yourself?
Yes, I enjoy reading kind of all sorts of different books actually. So I'm not in a band though. And no claim to fame there, I'm afraid. I never will be either. Although I love music, but I'll never be on the band. Never be at Glastonbury playing. I'm jealous.
Maybe you shake a tambourine, Mel.
Oh, maybe I could join you on tambourine.
Maybe we should start rehearsing now for the Homeless World Cup 2021.
Maybe. Well, the best ideas emerge from these things. I mean, when we came up with the idea of the Homeless World Cup, it was a crazy idea to begin with. So you never know. I might be there banging a tambourine with you.
Has it changed what you want to read at all at the moment? I mean, I guess as writers, very often you get less, paradoxically, you get less choice about what you read. But are you going to books that are a particular type of book at the moment?
I did when the lockdown started. I should say, by the way, that we think, my partner and I, we think that we had the mild version of it quite early on, and that kind of flattened us for a couple of weeks. We had sort of minor set of symptoms for about a week, but after that we were just exhausted. And at that point I was actually rereading quite a lot of old favourites, going back to familiar old friends from the shelves. But now actually what I'm actually doing is catching up on the monstrous to be read pile that I have in my office. I mean, it's not a to be read pile, actually, it's a to be read wall. So for me, I'm now connecting with writers that maybe I don't know quite so well, and I'm really enjoying that. Things that I've been sometimes sitting there for a while that I know I want to read and I just haven't been able to get around to.
Well, listen, I shall leave it here because I'd like to run for about half an hour, and I think that's as much as anybody can take of us. There's a few things I'd like to say before we disappear. Congratulations to Callie Taylor. Stranger went into number 10 in the Sunday Times charts today, and she was one of the first guests on this Facebook chat. So congratulations to Hachette, giving away free ebooks to NHS workers, and that means probably giving away some of your books there, Val. I'm not sure how I feel about that, because I suspect that NHS workers don't have a free second to read anything and too exhausted to if they do, but hopefully, some of them will be.
Well, we put them under e-readers and catch up when they finally get some time off at the end of this.
Yeah, and it's going to be a long end, isn't it? Because once they've finished dealing with COVID-19, there's going to be everything else that hasn't happened in the meantime. But anyway, they are there. And West Sussex Mind have asked me to mention that they're doing a short story competition online. I put the address of that and the Hachette thing in the comments for the Facebook. It's going to be judged by Rosanna Lay, and they're raising money by the entries for that competition. But it's a really great competition. If you have some short stories you want to enter, please do. But huge thanks to Val and to Mel. It's been absolutely wonderful talking to you. It's a real pleasure. It's great to peek into somebody else's houses, as I was saying before we started. It's what I like most about this. It's as far as I do for getting out these days. But thank you very much again.
No, thank you. Thank you. Great to chat.
All right, and over and out. I'm pressing the stop button. Thanks a lot.